Hello, denizens of the internet. We are halfway through we're at the halfway point through the 80s, 1985 to be specific, of our TV Guide Fall Preview journey. This is very exciting. As you will see, 1985 is a super important year for television, but you'll have to stay to the end to find out why. First, let's put this season into historical perspective with a look at the big news items from 1985. The Internet's domain name system, or DNS, is created. The charity single, We Are the World, is recorded. William Schroeder becomes the first artificial heart transplant patient to actually leave the hospital, but fell down in the parking lot. The IRA launched mortar attacks on the Royal Ulster Constabulary. The GNU or GNU Manifesto, written by Richard Stallman, is first published. Mikhail Gorbachev becomes leader of the Soviet Union.
WrestleMania is held at Madison Square Gardens featuring Hulk Hogan, Mr. T, Paul Orndorff, and Roddy Piper.
Amadeus wins Best Picture at the 57th Academy Awards. Coca-Cola introduces New Coke to overwhelmingly negative response. The Bobby Sox win the 30th Eurovision Song Contest with the song Lauda Svinge for Norway. Danny Sullivan beats Mario Andretti to win the 1985 Indianapolis 500. Hezbollah hijacks TWA Flight 847. Studio Ghibli is founded in Tokyo. Air India Flight 182 is blown up by terrorists over the Atlantic Ocean. Greenpeace ship Rainbow Warrior bombed by French agents. Live Aid benefit concert in London. The wreck of the Titanic discovered. Super Mario Bros. Is released for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Microsoft releases Windows 1.0. Unfortunately, 1985 seemed to be a banner year for terrorism. Hope the TV shows are way better. So here's the TV Guide Fall Preview for 1985.
Crazy Like a Fox, CBS. Rough and tumble private investigator Harry Fox Sr. solves crimes with the reluctant help of his son, respected San Francisco lawyer Harrison Ford Jr., starring Jack Warden and John Rubinstein. Lasted 2 seasons.
Sample episode. Retired waitress Rosie is lured into an alley and killed. Harry is a friend. He and his son chase away the killer. They find the murder not as random as it first appears. The show was a hit in its first season, ranking 10th with a 19.9 rating, and initially continued to pull solid numbers during its second season, but midway through the season, CBS brought back its Sunday night movie, bounced the show around the schedule until it died. Of special note, it featured Graham Chapman of Monty Python in one of his last roles.
Hometown, CBS. Ben and Mary, a devoted couple since their college years in the 1960s, shock their friends and teenage daughters when they send out invitations for their wedding. Everyone had assumed that they had already been married for years. Starring Jane Kaczmarek, Frank Luz, Andrew Rubin, Margaret Whitten, Christine Estabrook, John Bedford Lloyd, and Daniel Stern. Lasted 9 episodes. The show was basically The Big Chill. Getting people to stick around for a series after coming to a wedding just seems like a dumb premise. Moonlighting, ABC. Model Maddie Hayes is left almost penniless after being fleeced by an investment advisor. All she has left is a 2-bit detective agency. The manager of the agency, David Addison, convinces her to keep and run the agency. Together, they form a dynamic partnership starring Sybil Shepherd, Bruce Willis, and Alice Beasley. Lasted 5 seasons.
Sample episode. David gets the agency a job collecting money from debtors, which he believes that it will be easy, but Maddie is not so sure. They find themselves involved in murder, a disappearing body, and an international conspiracy. Moonlighting was a huge hit. It saved the career of Sybil Shepherd and launched the career of Bruce Willis. The show was one of the first to influence the dramedy genre. This was one very inventive show I never missed. Even the opening theme, co-written by Al Jarreau, became a huge hit. Bruce Willis made Die Hard while starring in the show. By the time the series ended, the movie was already available on VHS. In one of the last episodes, Willis and a love interest walk past a video rental store while an employee tears down a Die Hard poster from the window.
Mr. Belvedere, ABC. The series follows posh English butler Lynn Belvedere as he struggles to adapt to the Owens household in suburban Pittsburgh. The breadwinner, George, is a sports writer. His wife, Marcia, is attending law school. He is required to watch out for their children. Older son, Kevin, a senior in high school, daughter, Heather, a freshman, and Wesley in elementary school. Starring Christopher Hewitt, Bob Uecker, Eileen Graff, Rob Stone, Tracy Wells, and Bruce Beckham. Lasted 6 seasons.
Sample episode. George and Marcia go for a weekend trip to Florida, leaving Mr. Belvedere in charge of Kevin, Heather, and Wesley, but things go out of control as soon as they leave the house. Heather, who is grounded, wants to see a Prince concert with her friends, and Wesley brings over a massage therapist. Wow, 6 years and I barely recall this show's existence. Probably because it was the typical trope of Americans versus stodgy English. I also thought that Uecker was terrible. The movies with Clifton Webb, the movie versions with Clifton Webb were great, and I suggest you watch the second one, Mr. Belvedere Goes to College.
Hollywood Beat, ABC. Nick McCarran and Jack Ratto work far from the glamorous area of Los Angeles, donning oddball outfits, working undercover. The headquarters in the seedy area is a business run by George Grinsky, and they report to Captain Wes Biddle, starring Jack Scalia, Jay Acavoni, John Matuzak, Edward Winter. 14 episodes made, only 6 were aired. What a surprise. Next. Lime Street, ABC. Divorced father Grayson Culver is a Virginia horse breeder who teams with Britt Edward Wingate to investigate insurance cases. On the home front, James lives with daughters Elizabeth and Margaret Ann, plus his debonair father Henry. Starring Robert Wagner, Anne Haney, Maya Bruton, Lou Ayres, Julie Fulton, and Patrick McNee. 8 episodes produced, 4 were aired.
Normally, I leave duds like this alone and just move on, but this show presents a nice microcosm about the vagaries and risks of the TV business. Lime Street starred the very popular Robert Wagner. This series was created by Linda Bloodworth Thomason and her husband Harry Thomason. They were responsible for 2 major TV hits, Designing Women and Evening Shade. Linda was a very experienced scriptwriter. So what happened here was one of the actors, Samantha Smith, died in a plane crash 3 shows in. But even so, it was just a family version of It Takes a Thief or Heart to Heart. It hinged on Wagner's popularity, but unfortunately it was competing with another freshman show that became a top hit, The Golden Girls. But it wasn't the network that canceled the show. It was the producers who realized that going on after the death of Smith was the wrong thing to do.
The Golden Girls, NBC. The Golden Girls is based on the lives of 4 older women who have all been divorced or widowed and are now roommates. Dorothy's main goal is to find a companion she can relate to, while her mother, Sophie, adds her comical outlook and frequent stories. Rose is a little corny, but lovable. One thing that changes nearly every episode is whom Blanche is courting. Starring B. Arthur, Betty White, Rue McClanahan, and Estelle Getty. Lasted 7 seasons.
Sample episode. Rose is afraid of sexual intimacy with her boyfriend Arnie because She feels she would be cheating on her late husband, Charlie. Nothing ambiguous about the Golden Girls. This was a huge hit, and deservedly so. The premise was believable and so rich with comic possibilities, along with genuine heart. I would guess its only impediment to getting produced would have been network execs concerned about the target demographic being, well, too old. The brilliant Susan Harris created the show. The characters were clearly defined and wonderfully cast. Getty was cast as the eldest character to make it seem the others were still young and lively. I would say, along with Frasier, this was the easiest show to do a spec script for, especially because the characters of mature women allowed writers to get extremely dirty and get away with it.
227, NBC. 227 follows the lives of people in a middle-class apartment building, 227 Lexington Place, Washington, D.C. The show is centered around Mary Jenkins, a nosy and tart-tongued but lovable housewife, her husband Lester, who has his own construction company, and their daughter Brenda is boy crazy yet smart and studious. Starring Marla Gibbs, Hal Williams, Helen Martin, Elena Reed Hall, and Regina King. Lasted 5 seasons.
Sample episode. Mary receives praise for complaining to the president about a pothole. Then the Secret Service shows up. Gibbs had become famous as Florence, the maid on The Jeffersons. While this was a different role, Gibbs brought a little bit of Florence to Mary, a hidden gem of a sitcom.
MacGyver, ABC. MacGyver is the anti-Bond. He doesn't drink or womanize and never ever shoots guns to win battles. He does, however, like 007 up against impossible odds, always win, even if in the process it involves being beaten up, blown up, knifed, shot, or sprayed with insecticides. Starring Richard Dean Anderson, Dana Elcar, and Bruce McGill. Lasted 7 seasons.
Sample episode. MacGyver is sent to Central America to rescue an American journalist and escape out of the country. The dictator of the country and his army pursue MacGyver, making the escape very difficult. What else can be said about a show that became a verb? To MacGyver, MacGyvering. The show had a slow start in its first season, but then became a sleeper hit in its second. The MacGyverisms shown in the series were all based on scientific fact vetted by consulting scientists. But not all of the steps needed to create the experiment were shown. This was done on purpose to prevent children who were watching the show from duplicating the experiments themselves and possibly getting injured. But did he ever put Mentos in a Coke bottle?
Amazing Stories, NBC. This anthology series, created by Steven Spielberg, will showcase a new, amazing, fantastic, funny, odd, and sometimes scary, sad story, each week starring many famous actors and actresses, directed by Hollywood's finest. Lasted 2 years. Cancelled due to bad ratings. The networks keep trying anthology shows, and they mostly fail, even when the quality of Amazing Stories was exceptionally high. Alfred Hitchcock presents NBC, an anthology series modeled after and frequently based upon the original series of the 1950s to 1960s. It featured a colorized version of Hitchcock's intros. Lasted 4 seasons. You can't fault NBC for not pushing the anthology concept. Employed some very good actors recreating the original, very disturbing stories. Growing Pains, ABC. It's hard enough to raise a kid nowadays, but when you have to cope with these kids, things tend to get out of hand. Dr. Seaver, a psychologist, and his wife Maggie Seaver, a journalist, try to do their best raising their family, and although their kids, Mike, Ben, Carol, and Chrissy, cause them endless problems, they manage to keep the family close together. Starring Alan Thicke, Joanne Kearns, Kirk Cameron, Jeremy Miller, and Tracy Gold. Lasted 7 seasons.
Sample episode. A Madonna-style teenager seductress wreaks havoc in the Seaver household when she appears at their doorstep in some rather revealing clothing, looking for Mike and plotting to make him her next seduction. I think this show is the epitome of what everyone made fun of about terrible sitcoms, where the jokes weren't funny, but the laugh track was pounding.
A Family Honor. ABC. Our Family Honor is about two New York families who had known each other since their childhoods and who were involved in competing family businesses. The McKay family mostly worked for the New York City Police Department, where Patrick was the commissioner, while the Danzigs were deeply involved in organized crime, with patriarch Vincent filling the role of Godfather, starring Eli Wallach, Daphne Ashbrook, Tom Mason, Jorgen Johnson, Michael Madsen, Kenneth McMillan, Barbara Stewart, Cherie Wilson, Michael Woods, Ron Karabatsos, and Ray Liotta. Lasted 13 episodes. The Insiders, ABC. Miami Vice-styled show about Nick, an undercover reporter who works for nationally syndicated News Point. Only McKay, a hustler, ex-con, and Nick's main contact on the street, and Alice West, the paper's editor, know his true identity. Starring Nicholas Campbell, Stoney Jackson, and Gail Strickland. Lasted 13 episodes. Charlie and Company, CBS. Charlie Richmond is a black middle-class employee of the Division of Highways who juggles his work and home life with his wife Diana, a school teacher. The couple have 3 children, 16-year-old Junior, 15-year-old Lauren, and 9-year-old Robert. Starring Flip Wilson, Gladys Knight, Fran Robinson, Christoph St. John, and Jaleel White. Lasted 1 season.
Sample episode. Charlie faces difficult tasks on the home front. He has to cancel the family's camping trip due to work, and Lauren wants to discuss sex. Okay, this was a horrible show. I felt bad for Wilson and Knight. Apparently, this originally featured a white cast, and CBS quickly retooled it with a black cast as a competitor to The Cosby Show. Enough said.
George Burns Comedy Week. CBS, a comedy anthology series hosted by George Burns, lasted 13 episodes. Interesting premise, basically a 24-minute sketch every week. There were some standouts featuring Martin Mull, Eugene Levy, and Harvey Korman. Dramas are easy, comedy is hard. Helltown, NBC. The story of Noah Hardstep Rivers, a hard-living Catholic priest at a church in a crime-filled neighborhood on the east side of Los Angeles. Starring Robert Blake, Whitman Mayo, Jeff Corey, Natalie Corr, Vonette McGee as Sister Indigo, and Isabel Grandin as Sister Cakes. I don't make this shit up, folks. Mercifully put out of its misery on Christmas Day. Stir Crazy, CBS. Tells the story of 2 socially awkward friends, Harry Fletcher and Skip Harrington, who were wrongfully convicted and sentenced to 132 years in prison. While working on a chain gang, they escape and set out after Crawford, the man who actually committed the crime for which they had been sentenced. Pursuing them is the aggressive, ruthless, and cold-hearted Captain Betty Phillips. Starring Joe Guzaldo, Larry Riley, Jeannie Wilson, and Mark Silver. Lasted 1 month. Yes, it was based on the hit movie starring Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, except this one stunk. The Equalizer, CBS. Robert McCall is the Equalizer, a private detective with a lot of contacts who is available for hire if you have a problem that you don't know how to solve. He tries to atone for his past by offering, usually free of charge, his services as a troubleshooter, a protector. If you needed him, you could find him in the classifieds. Got a problem? Odds against you? Call the Equalizer, 212-555-4200. Starring Edward Woodward and sometimes Keith Sarabaika. Lasted 4 seasons.
Sample episode. A young New York City patrolwoman contacts McCall to help her take down a trio of dirty cops, which include her partner. I loved this surprisingly violent series. The highlight was Woodward's smooth, well-mannered performance.
Lady Blue, ABC. Katie Mahoney patrols the grittier streets of Chicago, dispatching the steamier elements before reporting to her boss, Terry McNichol. Katie's intensity about her job interferes with her social life, starring Jamie Rose and Danny Aiello, lasted half a season. Katie was modeled after Dirty Harry. Watchdog groups named it the most violent show on TV. Some commented that it was an experiment in combining the hardcore cop genre with a female lead. While the show was not very good, it was ahead of its time. The Colbys, ABC. Jeff Colby accepts an offer from his Aunt Constance Colby to move to California and work alongside his uncle Jason in the family business Colby Enterprises. He unknowingly bumps into his ex-wife Fallon Carrington, who now has amnesia and has married Miles Colby, Jeff's cousin. Sable Colby made her mark as the scheming vixen to keep her husband Jason close and to stay super rich. Starring Charlton Heston, John James, Catherine Ross, Emma Sims, Maxwell Caulfield, Tracy Scoggins, Barbara Stanwyck, Ricardo Montalban, and way too many more. Lasted 2 years.
I'm not going to give you a sample episode. It was a soap opera. Lots of infidelity and backstabbing. A spin-off of the huge hit Dynasty. This was an awful show amongst awful shows. Stanwyck left after the first year. It was the most expensive show on TV at the time. $1 million per episode.
Twilight Zone, CBS. An updated version of the famous 1959 television series created by Rod Serling. Each week presents 1 to 3 tales about some unusual situation that turns out to be even more unusual than initially suspected. Lasted 3 years. Better than what you might have expected. Misfits of Science! NBC. A superhero series about a group of young mutants who work for an American think tank fighting crime. Elvin can shrink to a size of 8 inches, Gloria has telekinetic powers, and Johnny B could fire lightning bolts from his hands. Starring Dean Paul Martin, Kevin Peter Hall, Mark Thomas Miller, and Courtney Cox. Lasted almost a season.
Sample episode. Harry, genius bottle washer at Humanidyne, cobbles together a transmitter from company discards and makes contact with aliens. At least that's what he thinks he's done. The reality is far more dangerous. It's pretty easy to tell that this high-concept show was the brainchild of then president of NBC Entertainment, Brandon Tartikoff. The origin stories are a hoot. Elvin can shrink to 11 inches using hormonal treatments. Johnny B got electrocuted on stage playing electric guitar, and Gloria is a troubled telekinetic teenager with a history of juvenile delinquency and a mother in a mental institution who claims Gloria's father is from outer space. They don't make TV shows like this anymore.
Spencer for Hire, ABC. Mystery suspense series based on Robert Parker's Spencer novels. Spencer is a private investigator living in Boston, gets involved in a new murder mystery each episode. Using his years of experience, his natural talents for observation and reasoning, and the occasional bit of help from his friend Hawk, Spencer never fails to solve the crime. Starring Robert Urich, Avery Brooks, and Ron McClarty. Lasted 3 seasons.
Sample episode. An old man whom Spencer and Hawk knows is shot. They discover that the killer are a couple who comes from an affluent background, which they hide behind. It turns into a cat and mouse game for Spencer and Hawk, who are determined to take them down. This was a very smart show. Urich was his usual charming self, and Brooks was a great partner. The show had good ratings, but was ultimately canceled because it was shot in Boston, even in the winter, and ABC felt it cost too much.
And as I promised at the beginning, I've left the most important TV show of 1985 to the end. 4 on the Floor. Showtime and CBC. 4 on the Floor was a comedy series of half-hour episodes consisting of various sketches written and performed by the Frantics, a Canadian comedy troupe. The show made Boot to the Head and Mr. Canoehead famous, starring the Frantics, Paul Chato, Rick Green, Dan Redican, and Peter Wildman. Special appearances by Maria Verkratzis, Rosemary Dunsmore, and Sheila McCarthy. Lasted only 13 fucking episodes! Stinking bastards.
So, that's it for 1985. Actually, a banner year for TV shows. And even some of the misses were not so bad. Love hearing your TV Guide remembrances. Till next time, denizens, be seeing you.